Holly Rosenfink from Neighbors for Refugees. I'm so glad that you're all here for our special NFR Zoom on COVID-19's impact on refugees. Just in case you don't know about Neighbors for Refugees, but I think you all do, Neighbors for Refugees is a refugee resettlement organization. We're a 501c3, and we advocate for the rights of refugees everywhere and work directly with newly arrived refugee families, providing them with the necessary services, resources, community support to bolster resilience, achieve self-sufficiency, and thrive in their new homes. Advocacy is another, of course, another big piece of our work, and that's why we're doing this tonight. And we're so proud to be joined by currently 3 members. We're hoping one more is coming who's scheduled to be here. But they're members of humanitarian organizations that will shed light on the current COVID-19 crisis's impact on refugees, asylum seekers, asylees, and SIVs. These organizations are on the front lines, providing essential services to them. Last week, I just want to know before we start the conversation, we wrote to you about the new rule proposed that would decimate the new protections that remain for asylum seekers. And we'll talk about that later, but I want you to know that you have a few hours left to make a comment to hopefully change this terrible legislation. And we're putting the URL in the chat box for the Federal Register, or you should put a unique comment, maybe talk about your own experiences or why the fundamental right to seek asylum should not be disturbed. So on behalf of Neighbors for Refugees, we're honored to be joined by several people. I'm going to introduce them to you now. Emma Myers, Project Manager at RIF, Support for Refugee Seekers in NYC. Ian Zazanovich, Co-Executive Director at Queer Detainee Empowerment Project. And Leah Cover, Founder and Executive Director of Refuge. And we are expecting Adafi Akpuro, Executive Director of RDF Refugee Shelter. So welcome everyone. And we're going to be together more or less for the next hour, and you're going to meet all of our wonderful speakers in a minute. But before that, I just want to give you a few ground rules about the Zoom chat, which you probably all know very well now because you've probably been on a million by this point. But we'll be together, of course, for the next hour. And each one of our guests is going to spend about 7 or 8 minutes talking about their organizations and how they're dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. While you're listening, if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. And at the end of the conversation, the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, we'll be coming back to some of your questions. And it'll be a time when we can really engage. You can engage with the speakers too. We're also recording this conversation, so we'll have the link available for all of your friends and colleagues after the conversation. And with that, I'd like to turn to Emma to kick off the conversation. Emma, thank you so much.
Thank you, Holly, for the introduction and for coordinating this, and then thanks to Neighbors for Refugees for pulling it together. It's really nice to be in this group, able to talk about some of these issues. Holly had asked us to begin by just talking a bit about the impact of COVID-19 on asylum seekers as we saw it in our communities, and some of what we've done in response as an entry point to the conversation. So very briefly, I'm going to share a little bit on that. I'm sure much of it's going to be familiar to you all also working in this space. But for us, we really saw 3 kind of core concerns among our community of asylum seekers in March when the city shut down. The first was jobs. People lost their jobs overnight. Most of the asylum seekers in our community, even people who came from professional backgrounds back home, were in survival positions, which tended to be in the industries that were hardest hit by closures. These were also people who tended to be living already paycheck to paycheck. That's the nature of the jobs they were doing. Many of them were informal, which added another layer of vulnerability, especially when we talk about accessing the government benefits that became available in response to the pandemic closures. So we had people who suddenly had no income overnight. That really intersected with an issue of informal housing, which is really common among the asylum seeking community, at least the one we work with, whether that's people who are subletting from friends or, renting one room in an apartment but have many roommates. people who didn't have written leases were really unsure which of New York's tenant protections extended to them. And the good news is a lot of them do. New York City has amazing tenant protection. But there was a lot of uncertainty, and with that stress that came as people were, without income suddenly, and then thinking, I can't pay rent, and what does that look like for me if I'm in an informal housing situation? The last piece that I think is so worth highlighting is that a lot of people, especially those who are new to New York, and if you're new to New York and you've just applied for asylum, you're also probably an asylum seeker who doesn't yet have work authorization, meaning you can't access government benefits by and large. These folks are really far away from personal support systems, navigating a new city, some people in a new language, and all of these factors really came together in our community to create massive stress in the first, and hardship in the first couple weeks and months of the pandemic. Initially, we were focused on cash assistance, grants that were easily accessible to the folks in our community. I think this is something that very few large organizations had put this mechanism in place kind of in the first month, say, of New York City's closure. And so it's small organizations like the ones represented here that were able to move really quickly to get cash assistance directly into the hands of asylum seekers who couldn't access government benefits before the bigger organizations that we're familiar with were, able to get their more institutional process into place. And so that stopgap measure was really important for us. We distributed over 150 loans totaling about $25,000 in the first month of the crisis, which and I'd love to talk more about this with you all, it pushed our organizational capacity to the limit. I was on the phone with Venmo so much about limits on weekly transfers, and this money got stuck because it looked suspicious. And so we really, as an organization, we realized that just the capacity it takes to do cash assistance that's so kind of community-based. The second thing that we put in place that was really critical to our response was a program of trained volunteer navigators to help people apply for unemployment insurance. As we've all heard in the news, accessing unemployment insurance in March, April, May, even last month was incredibly complicated and confusing, and the website would drop and the phone number wasn't working. And so our navigators were there to help people, whether it's, they didn't have access to a computer to apply online, or it was just an intimidating process, which it is. Our navigators were helping in that way. They were also working to help asylum seekers who were eligible access HRA benefits, private relief funds, and mutual aid groups. And mutual aid for many in our community was a kind of foreign, at once a really familiar concept, communities helping communities, but also kind of a foreign mechanism to access for some who were new to their neighborhoods. We also hired a housing attorney, and we're an organization that provides orientation services, mostly legally focused for asylum seekers when they first arrive in New York. And so housing law is like nowhere near what we usually touch, but we found that the issue was just coming up so much that we needed to have an expert. And as tomorrow, New York State's gonna open its rent relief program for some people. Very few asylum seekers will be eligible. It looks like the eviction moratorium is going to get lifted a little earlier than was initially planned. And so I think housing is going to continue to be a huge issue, especially when PUA expires at the end of this month. I think that's everything I'll cover now. I'm sure more will come up in the discussion. I'd just like to finish by reiterating what Holly said about advocacy and the importance of advocacy. As a small organization, we really struggle with, what is our role given our limited capacity in terms of providing orientation services, but also doing the advocacy, especially in the context of an administration that's just increasingly kind of hostile and hateful towards immigrants. The fact that advocacy work is being done means a lot to the people in our community, to the asylum seekers in our community regularly. They're like, we're glad to see people care about the issue and about us. And so it's great to have organizations like Neighbors for Refugees doing that work so that, when we're on the ground trying to help on some of these more practical parts of day-to-day life, we can still point to you guys and say, people are doing this for you, So I'll close with that. I believe I'm turning it over to Ian.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for your invitation to this panel. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you, Holly, for organizing this panel, and Neighbors for Refugee for their interest in our work. So, Queer Detainee Empowerment Project exists since 6 years. We support LGBTQ and HIV positive immigrants that are in detention centers. So since the beginning of creation of our organization, we have two programs that are working together. One is community organizing program, another it's direct services. So regarding the way we started working with queer and trans immigrant in detention center was to do visitations to New Jersey detention centers, since they are the closest ones to New York City, and our office is based since the beginning in New York City. So we were visiting Elizabeth, Bergen County Jail, Essex County Jail, Hudson County Jail. And a couple of years ago, we moved our services. We expanded them towards West Coast and South and other parts of US. Since you can imagine, there's a lot of trans and queer immigrants that are crossing US-Mexico border. So they would be detained closer to the border, California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, also Washington State. So the way we organize our direct support services, and I'm coordinating this program, is we have detention program and also post-release support. So I will speak a little bit about the detention program. It's the services we can provide. We are running hotline Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. We are able to receive calls from folks in detention centers. The way they get in touch with us is either passing between themselves our contacts, since once we start working with one detention center, people will pass their contact within the community, and they will reach out either through letters or phone call. There's a lot of organizations we are working with, providing illegal services, but also other visitation groups and community organizing, community-based organizations that would refer queer folks to us. We are working with all parts of queer community, and we also are working with people coming from multiple geographical regions. We don't have specific angle. So for folks who are still in detention center, first thing we're doing is connecting them with legal services. Because as you can imagine, winning your asylum case or just getting released without an attorney, it's extremely difficult. Then the other thing we can do is provide people with letters of support, with commissary funds, so they can stay in touch with us through phones and letters, but also with their attorneys and their community in the family, if they have still a relationship with them. We also connect people with community bond funds if the person has a bond, so they can be released as soon as possible. If the person needs sponsor, as you can imagine, queer folks are very often they are fleeing their countries because of the persecution of from their families, communities, and government. So very often people are coming here and they don't have any ties and any community here. So they have to rely on our organization as ours. And then once the person is getting released, we can also provide them with free plane ticket. We have connections. We collaborate with Miles for Migrants, which is this great non-for-profit where you can donate your miles and they can connect you with the, basically they can book a plane ticket with your miles for person who is getting released from detention or coming from another country to US. And then the cases that we're taking to New York City for post-release are people who are eligible for housing. As Emma mentioned, housing is very, very difficult in New York City. So we're working with folks under 25 years old and people who are living with HIV and connecting them either with California, that is another organization who is providing free housing to LGBTQ youth, or with HASA. And the way, so once the person comes to New York City, we are providing them with housing, as I mentioned, but also legal services. We connect them to medical services, mental health support, legal services, making sure that they have accompaniment if they're going to ICE check-in, if they're going to their court hearing, etc. And we also have community meetings every week, so people can get connected and they can find the sense of belonging. So as you can imagine, the impact of COVID-19 on membership that we're working with was huge. I won't go deeply to what Emma described already about challenges of people who are already in New York City, but I will focus more on impact of COVID-19 on people who are still in detention centers. So QDEP, since the beginning of our mission, of our creation, is abolitionist organization. So since the beginning, we're advocating and organizing against detention centers, which are basically prisons where immigrants are held until they will be released by ICE or immigration judge, or until they will win their immigration benefits. So if you can imagine being trapped in a prison during COVID-19, where you cannot practice social distancing, where the hygienic conditions are terrible, where most of our folks have their immune system is compromised. So basically, they were living and they are still living in death traps because ICE is totally it's not possible for ICE to make sure that people have access to masks, to hand sanitizer, to sterilize all the surfaces, etc. So people get constantly contaminated. They are getting sick. They don't have medication. They don't have access to doctors, etc. A lot of HIV positive members are very, very scared for their lives. As you know, ICE has horrible record about medical neglect. There's a lot of folks who died in detention centers, including trans women, including HIV positive folks. ICE don't care at all about what happens to them. So our first steps was to push our organizing and create a campaign to free them all. And we are leading the campaign in New Jersey and New York City with organizations who are working with detention centers there to make sure that folks are released from detention centers. And then we are right now regarding direct services and COVID-19. So our membership was impacted similarly to RIF membership. So people who had jobs lost them. Folks are struggling with housing. They lost access to food pantries, etc. So what we've done from the beginning on direct service side, we created mutual aid support. So the GiveGap campaign that we share link to is the campaign that we're covering the cost of groceries. We're also supporting with toiletries, with rent support, utility support, phone service, etc., to make sure that our membership at least have this weight off their chest, because as you can imagine, also being isolated, being an immigrant with upcoming regulations regarding asylum law, our membership is very distressed, and impact on their mental health is huge. So we also were able to develop the network of therapists who are volunteering to help our members go through this hard process. We are enrolling people to HRA benefits that they are eligible for, and we keep organizing our virtual meetings. Before we had in-person meetings where we would serve dinner and provide Metro cards, but right now we do Zoom meetings every week for our members. And also, as Emma mentioned, we were providing cash assistance. The cash assistance we were providing was assistance provided by New York Immigration Coalition under the form of debit cards. And up to today, we distributed 130 cards, and we distributed around $30,000 through groceries, rent support, and utility support. And I think I'm over my time, so sorry about that.
You're not at all. Are you finished, Ian? Because
yeah.
Okay,
Thank
great,
you.
great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. You're doing incredible work, Ian, and we're so honored that you're here and to be your partner. And I just wanted to let everyone know that one of our speakers, Idafe Akporo from RDJ Refugee Shelter, is in Aruba on vacation. And he tried to log on to this conversation, and he's had trouble. So we do miss him, but we're going to drop his information in the chat box. And if you guys want to get in touch with him or find out more about his organization, you can find everything there. And Leah Cover is our other speaker tonight. She's founder and executive director of Ruth's Refuge. She actually introduced me to Ian, Emma, and Idafe. So we're really grateful to Leah, and we love the work she does. And take the mic, Leah. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Leah Cover, and it's great to be with you all here tonight. And thanks so much, Holly, and to Neighbors for Refugees, all of you, for hosting. This is a great idea. I think it's amazing, especially in these times, for us all to connect more to each other. And, you know, some of us know each other, some of us don't, and just sort of getting more of that flowing and learning from each other is great. So I'm really happy about that. And the more we can do it, the better, I say. Ruth's Refuge is the only organization in New York City that's dedicated to furnishing homes for refugees, asylum seekers, and asylees. And we're, as a 501c3, we're a little over a year old, but the work that we have been doing built out of the work that was being done by Congregation Beth Elohim, or CBE, refugee task force that was founded in late 2016, in October of 2016. And we eventually decided, in consultation with a lot of other refugee groups in the city, that it made sense to have a separate organization that was just dedicated to this work of furnishing homes. And the idea is to try and take more of the pressure off when people are, especially in New York City, where resettlement works differently, and also having the very large asylum seeking population and the housing issues in New York City. The reality is that people often are in temporary housing for a significant amount of time, whether it be shelter or informal arrangements that Emma and Ian were describing, before they have any chance to have permanent homes, or they're in detention for significant time periods and then have transition time and then finally find permanent housing. So it's a much more drawn out process here in the city. And so it makes it all the more necessary to have a separate group that's able to take some of the pressure off of focusing on that, finding the housing and paying for the housing and just getting by day to day. So we're able to provide the material support of what people need as just the physical stuff in their homes. So we provide furniture that's beds, mattresses, couches, table and chair sets, TVs, rugs, dressers, coffee tables and nightstands, and then all the kitchen supplies that you could imagine you'd want to outfit, and bedding, all that sort of thing. And so that's generally been our mission, is that we get a combination of donated new items and used items, and then we would have volunteers as well as donated moves from professional movers, and we would get the stuff out to the family or individual, and we'd work together to set everything up. And that was usually the model that we had. We also had storage units in a storage facility, and clients could come and pick out what they wanted. So that, you know, give people a little bit more agency, not just having people just provide stuff for them, but they get to actually pick it out, which definitely made a big difference to a lot of people. Now, a lot of this has had to change as a result of the pandemic. And obviously you heard Ian and Emma talk about the significant strain that clients were under, and the big focus that many groups were making towards both cash assistance and helping people pay rent, as well as getting groceries. So that was the big focus of many groups. And our group, we did some emergency grocery supply at the beginning, but our main focus has been trying to continue to provide people with the essentials that they need in their home. But we've had to sort of rejigger how we do that. So we wanted to make sure that we continued operating, but we had to shut down our storage space for safety reasons. And so we did our last in-person large-scale apartment setup on March 13th, and then we closed down the storage. And since that time, we've pivoted to providing what we call essential items, and I can tell you what's on that list, but we've been getting it from online platforms and having that delivered directly to the clients. And that way we haven't had to have more in-person interactions than necessary to get people things. So on the essentials list, we've been continuing to provide beds and mattresses, and all the other large furniture has unfortunately had to wait, and people are now on our waiting lists for when we're able to fully reopen our storage. And then they'll be able to supplement with those things. And then we've also been able to provide bedding and all the kitchen basics. So that would be like pots and pans, dishes, glasses, cutting boards, knives, all that sort of basic stuff, but not any more of the appliances that we used to provide as well. That has to wait until the storage is fully reopened. And we've been providing cleaning supplies as well as toiletries. So that's been our essentials that we've been providing. We actually now have started phasing reopening our storage space, and as part of that, we've been able to start supplementing with smaller items for clients. So now we can give like microwaves and blenders and rice cookers and things like that to people that we already had in our storage. We can supplement with other items like that, and we can now also do rugs. The larger furniture we're still waiting on, and that's largely because the moving company that we have a strong relationship with they had shut down briefly and they've reopened, and now they're swamped with paying customers. So they have to get through some of that before they can start helping us again. So we're continuing to have a bit of a wait list. We've also been providing air conditioners, and Neighbors for Refugees has been very helpful with that as well, with funding. But we're also continuing to try and get more funding for air conditioners because we have a wait list for that now as well. but we're continuing to provide the essential items, and it's been a big strain on our resources, as all of us little nonprofits are quite strained right now, I think. And we've given, I guess since mid-March, we've given over $20,000 worth of goods to clients. We'll continue to do that, and we're continuing to reopen slowly. We're still not taking new donations of things yet at this point, and that's, again, we're still trying to figure out the safest protocols for that, and it's probably going to involve going through our professional movers once they have more time again. And so that's the general gist of how we're working. We're also trying to shift now to having more of a virtual shopping ability for our clients, since they can no longer come to the storage space to pick out, because right now we have one person in the storage space at a time, and that's it. And then we have a volunteer comes to pick up an item or a few items that can fit in a car and bring it to a client, and we're doing contactless pickup and drop off. Our hope is eventually to be able to have a system online where clients could virtually shop, and obviously they wouldn't be paying for any of the items, but they'd be picking them out, and then we'd know to set those aside for them, and then we could go back to having the full-scale deliveries of that. So that's what we're working towards right now, and doing sort of more of the back end work on that. So if you know people who are good at that sort of system development, we are always open to more help on that too. So, but that's the basic gist of what we've been. And just to say, we've also seen a huge uptick in the number of clients too that need our services. And I think that, again, everybody's seeing as well. There's just more people in need right now.
Thank you, Leah. So I was wondering, before we head into Q&A, if Ian, Emma, or Leah, or all of you even, could tell us a story about one of your clients. No names, of course. But if you could put a personal kind of touch, or personal, give us a reflection or a story about one of your clients, just to bring it home a little bit for some of us who aren't really as absorbed in it as you are every day. Would one of you like to do that?
Sure. I mean, since I'm still unmuted, I guess I could start. So we had a client who had just moved out of shelter and into her own home, and had a baby and 2 other young children, and was feeling quite overwhelmed. And she was referred to us for furnishing, and I think it came as a shock to her how much stuff wound up coming, and it was getting delivered to her sort of day after day, and she just she was just so thankful, and in particular, she just wanted us to know how much it made her feel seen and acknowledged, and know that there were people out there who actually cared what was going on in her life, and that made a huge difference to her. And I think, I see that over and over again, that people go through so much trauma and pain getting here, and getting settled, and face so much even once they're here, that to know that there are people who actually care and want them to be part of the community, it goes a long way.
I agree. Ian or Emma, could you tell us a story, put a personal face to this?
A story came to mind that I think draws off Leah as well. We had a Venezuelan asylum seeker who came to the US in 2018 with her family, her husband and her 2 sons. And she had a set of kind of longstanding health issues that made COVID especially stressful for her, also made being inside for prolonged periods really physically and mentally challenging for her. And what initially began as a legal consultation about kind of the grounds of their claim for asylum has turned into a much bigger relationship. We paired her with one of our Spanish-speaking volunteers really at the beginning of COVID to help her understand why she wasn't going to be able to access unemployment insurance, which was really frustrating for a lot of people in our community. Who, you know, it's like you sift through all the rules and only to, at the very end of 30 minutes of digging, figure out like, this doesn't apply to me. And it's because, you know, the subtext is like, it's because I'm not welcome in this country and the government doesn't want to welcome me into this country. And so our volunteer really helped kind of like streamline that process and then begin really quickly connecting her with different private relief funds for which she was a good fit. Private relief funds were also super frustrating because they'd open and 2 minutes later they would close because they reached the max capacity of applications they could handle, or, you know, someone would apply, but there'd be this very specific eligibility criteria. So their application would kind of get thrown out and they never hear from the organization again. And that was just demoralizing on top of realizing that you weren't going to be able to access government benefits. She was able to ultimately able to access 2 private relief funds kind of in partnership with our navigator who was helping her through the process. Simultaneously, she was dealing with a landlord who was just super aggressive about her and her family paying rent each month. And it got to a kind of untenable place where she realized that she needed to move out in order for them to feel stable in their housing situation. And so the last thing we did was connect her with our housing attorney to talk about what her kind of rights related to moving out of the space were to try to end that landlord-tenant relationship in a way that would be positive for her and where she'd be able financially to afford to move into a new space that was better for her and her family in the context of us being at home so much right now. And I think it underscores both kind of the holistic support we can provide when we really get to know a person, and especially when one person in an organization, in this case, David, the navigator who helped her, really got to know her and got, you know, he was able to pull out pieces that from the outside initially, like we weren't seeing. And that helped us provide support that didn't occur to us initially. And then to Leia's point, in doing so, it's similar, you know, just as, you know, furnishing a home, which is the central part of who we are, in supporting somebody and coming to know them as like the full person they are. I think, you know, our clients do feel seen, as you put it, Leah, and just supported in a way that kind of relieves the stress of just feeling like I'm falling through all these cracks in the system and there's like no one around to catch me or to give me, even just to give me a hand to pull me up a little bit. So yeah, that's the story I share.
Ian?
Holly, do we still have time? So one of the stories that I wanted to share is actually one of my first clients. I started working with Covet 3 years ago as a case manager. And I started helping one of our members who was at the time incarcerated in California, in Otay Mesa Detention Center, which is one of the biggest private detention centers in California. And he was calling our office very often on hotline. We were able to provide him legal representation for his asylum hearing. We're providing him with commissary money, and he was able to win his asylum within 3 months. And then we provided him with plane tickets to New York City and connected him to all the services he needed. And up to this day, he's one of the most active volunteers in our organization. Before COVID, before we had to close down our office, he was coming every day to volunteer on hotline, talk to people who are still in detention, support them emotionally, write them letters, send them intake forms. He was also providing accompaniment and walking people through their first weeks in New York City once we would receive them here. And he became an awesome advocate for queer and trans immigrants still in detention center. And really with him, we were able to create this the strong community that Covet became, where it's not only non-for-profit, but a place where people come to. Well, right now with Covet, that's one of the issues, that there is no place, but this community where people would come and make friendships that last for years and help each other. And that's what we are doing, is developing the peer support, so it's not so hierarchical, where there is service provider and then person who is directly impacted, but creating this culture where people just help each other and walk each other through the process, tell about their own experience and how they managed to go through that. So yeah, this member is definitely very close to my heart, and yeah, very, very active still during pandemic on our virtual meetings, etc.
Thank you, Ian. Now I'd like to do something a little non-traditional. Usually we have questions in the chat box, but if anyone wants to ask a question or have a conversation with these three speakers, you could take yourself off mute right now and ask a question. That would be fine. Or I can ask questions, or we can have an engaging conversation for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Does anyone have a question or just a comment, want to pop in, who is not a speaker? Don't be shy.
Hi, I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Carly. I'm a medical student at New York Medical College. I am one of the leaders of a group called NYMC Center for Human Rights, and we work a lot doing medical evaluations for asylum seekers in sort of the trying to be Westchester area, but also the city, New Jersey area. And I'm in charge of sort of outreach education, and I'm wondering where your organizations need our help, because, a lot of us we're all pretty much virtual right now, but we do have students that are still really involved in helping out. And I just wanted to know among your organizations what I can bring back to my club and help you guys out with.
I can start responding to that question. Thank you so much, Carly, for offering your help. I know that medical evaluations are very important. And one thing that comes to my mind right now is, I know that the support of medical services and health providers during COVID-19 and pushing ICE and government to release as many people as possible was super important, because they could provide specific, medical knowledge about what happens when you're in confinement 24 hours per day with in overcrowded jails. What is the scenario for COVID to spread? And having their voices and having letters written to ICE officials or directors of DHS, etc. It was really helpful, and I think it pushed a lot of detention centers to release a lot of clients. Like we. Before COVID, we were working with 160 members inside of detention centers. Right now, we are working with 66. So it means 100 of people that we supported were released. And I know that the main reason was COVID, even if ICE is doing this quietly and they don't want to inform the public about that. They do, they are scared about liability, right? So definitely the advocacy of the health workers and medical students is super important. If you want, I can connect you to the group that is working on New Jersey, New York campaign, and they can definitely plug you into the work. Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Karen.
Medical evaluations are also a really helpful service for us, especially people who end up needing them with a shorter turnaround time and can't afford to pay for them. So I would just underscore that, but I think the second way that you all can advocate that Ian laid out in identifying the ways COVID is going to impact the asylum seeking community, especially those in detention, mainly those in detention, is, I think that point should stand as the takeaway here.
What are the ways that we can best influence policy? I mean, we have the comment that we can make tonight on the Federal Register, but what else can we do to help influence policy, to help asylum seekers?
I'll jump in again if I could. I think this is a really tough question, and the coincidence of timing of the end of this comment period for the proposed new rules, which are just so pernicious, and then the Trump administration rolling back on their proposal not to let international students study in the United States if they're fully online this semester. The juxtaposition of those two cases is really telling. I think you had a couple big institutions that had a real financial interest in having international students stay in the country, who very quickly were able to get an administration to shift its policy. I guess the question, and this is open to the group, is how do we marshal that kind of pressure for example, the asylum system?
Yeah. And also, I think what is interesting, right? Like, I don't know if you remember, that's also what you're talking about, Emma, is that so basically the new regulation that we're talking about right now was announced the day or day after there was a huge win regarding DACA. And it's just this weird, like, you get hit from one side, but then you have the victory. Like, as you can imagine, like, the last 4 years were just a huge roller coaster for everybody who is working with our community. But I think the best way right now to proceed is just to vote, to make sure that Trump is not reelected, even if, of course, that doesn't solve, everything, but at least lowers slightly the chance that immigrant community will be under so much of attack. Like, probably I spoke with several immigration lawyers regarding the policies right now, like the regulation that is several regulations actually, because this one that we're talking about, the comment that the public comment is the deadline is tonight, is one of the many that already have passed. So there are two important regulations that will impact a lot our membership that are coming into effect in August 24th and 25th, that will change rules around applying for work permit. As Emma was saying, a lot of asylum seekers have to wait for a long time to get their work permit. That's one of the big important moment once the folks are getting the work permit because finally they can start being independent. But right now, starting in August 25th, the deadline will be 1 year. So after 1 year, after the date that the person is applying for asylum, after 1 year, they can apply for work permit. In states or cities like New York City, it takes around 6 months to get the application processed. So you can imagine folks will be without work permit and exposed to different uninformal employment, or exposed to even more of exploitation they would normally be exposed to with work permits. So yeah, I think, and so coming back to the first sentence, I spoke with several immigration attorneys. They are saying that the regulations will pass. The question of the submitting of the reason why we want everybody to submit comments or multiple comments is to just slower the process, because the legal organizations will file the litigation as soon as it's possible, meaning tomorrow, and then start the litigation. And it just this race with time when we want to slow the government, because they have to look at each unique comment and read it, and then give as much time for litigation to be passed, or to challenge the ruling, the regulation that, by the way, is not a law, and it's totally illegal. That regulation is totally changing Asylum law and is just gutting it. So to have the judge overrule this regulation will be easy, but the time to process it, we have no idea if the regulation will go into effect or will not. The soonest it can go to effect is September 15th. And the latest, it's in 2021. And if the election, if the new president will not be Trump, then the new president will have power to overrule the regulation from the day one. But at the same time, like, who knows how important immigration is for Biden, etc. So it might affect temporarily our membership. But as also some of the lawyers saying that during those 4 years of horrible attacks, organizations like ours and also legal organizations learn how to respond to those ridiculous policies, regulations, laws, bills, etc. It just takes time, and it affects people in the meantime. Doesn't mean affects in a final way, because you can always apply for different benefit, which is Convention Against Torture or withholding of removal, and then reopen your case. But as you can imagine, it's super nerve-wracking. It just wastes of everybody's time and energy, especially people concerned. It's just a torture. So I would say just vote, so this asshole is not in power anymore. Yeah.
If I could underscore something Ann said that I think is really relevant to draw out, especially to the advice of using your energy and platforms right now to getting people to vote on immigration as an issue. The rules that are going to go into effect in August that change the waiting period for a work permit from 150 days after you've submitted your application to 365 days are part of this bigger puzzle. And the new proposed rules, there's a piece that says someone who works informally during the period that their asylum application is being considered, or who doesn't pay taxes, will no longer be eligible to receive asylum. And so you have an administration that's saying you can't work for a year and a half, 2 years after you arrive in this country legally. Anybody who doesn't have the means is going to work informally, but by working informally, you're going to become ineligible to apply for asylum. I think taking the two together, even though the first one, the August ones, fall off our radar a lot, we don't think about them because they're very procedural. Together, it is just, they so strategically finds ways to make asylum inaccessible to anybody who doesn't have tremendous amount of funds when they arrive in this country.
I just wanted to weigh in terms of what people can do right now. I mean, certainly there's the commenting, there's contacting legislators, there's all that standard stuff that we all are really familiar with. And I'm going to take off my Ruth's Refuge hat here and just say, as just a regular, volunteer in refugee issues for the past few years, not as heading a 501c3, what everybody should be working like crazy on is electoral politics right now. They should be out there getting in touch with organizations that are doing the work of getting out the vote and doing the work in the swing states of getting people who are like, right on the edge over to the right side. I mean, like, that asylum is going to be dead if the election goes a particular way this November. That's just the way it is. So I think that has to be the #1 focus.
And I think to add to that, yeah, in the meantime, I think exactly the work you're all doing is super important, because while, for example, people don't have work permits, they need to rely on communities and opening housing, opening homes if you have a spare room, or for example, yeah, if you can be a sponsor of somebody who is in detention center, just providing your paperwork so one person can be released. Doing this a very direct support. It is also important because, as you all know, folks come here and they don't have communities here. So while we are trying to shift things politically, I think being on the ground and continue this work is also super important.
Thank you, Ian. Jen Wachtel just made a comment that I want to give a shout out to about how it's really important to get in touch with your elected representatives and Congress members. And Jen, you are speaking with your senators in Maryland tomorrow, and we really are grateful for that you're doing that. And that's something that Neighbors for Refugees is starting to do too. So that's really good advice.
I'm a little nervous, but this talk today has given me additional motivation. Not that I needed more, but I really appreciate everything that I've learned this evening. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'm also inspired by our speakers. I'm motivated. I knew I would be. And all the information in the chat box is so important. Elaine's been dropping in URLs about the deadline tonight and what you can do and how you can frame your comment. There are a lot of articles, a lot of really good information here. We'll copy all of it. So we'll have it and figure out how to get this to you guys. And you're welcome to come to us also for this information. A reminder that we're recording this conversation, so you'll be able to hear it, to share it with your colleagues and friends. And we're just really grateful to Ian, Leah, and Emma. We're sorry that Adafe could not join us, of course. Maybe he'll join us for a future conversation. And we'll have more of these. We hope you can come again. And everyone have a good night. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you to everyone for speaking.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.